Hey, this is John Scott Dixon, and welcome to the Business Growth Podcast, brought to you by Aiden Taylor Marketing. Ready to grow? We're excited to help. This podcast is an interview I recently did with Tim Crown. He's chairman of the board for Insight Enterprises. They are a tech company with approximately $10 billion in annual revenue. The title of the webinar was, What Lessons Are Big Companies Learning that can help small businesses with remote work? But it evolved into a little bit more about the current situation with the COVID-19. And I think there's some really great pearls that Tim shares in this short interview. Let's do it. So, pleasure to have Tim Crown on, chairman of the board for Insight Enterprises, has been running that company for whatever, 30 years plus?
33.
33 years to be exact, huh? And
in a row.
And so, what are you at now? 7 billion or so in annual revenue, something like that?
Hopefully hitting closer to 10 this year, but it goes up every year, I hope. That's the goal.
That's the goal, right? That's the goal. Yeah. Awesome. So, hey, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us about the things you see, being at the top of a large company. We're looking for things that you're seeing from that vantage point that you might be able to shed some light on for us. And so I'm just going to let you be Tim and go do that. And then we may have some questions from the audience and we'll get into it. So anytime.
Sure. Let me give you the 80,000 foot view, as I like to say, and then we can dive into individual questions, or you can guide me on things where people are actually interested. So I spend 10 or 20 hours a week on Insight, and the rest of the time on a portfolio of businesses that we're either majority or minority investors in. And so it's kind of across the board. And I put up, in my opinion, a very fun background of the COVID because that's pretty much on the mind of every person that we talk to in business. And this is especially true of what I'm going to emphasize, which is what I would call enterprise. So at Insight, from a supplier perspective, we're talking to the folks at HP, IBM, Microsoft, Cisco on a regular basis. And we're also talking to, as an example, a couple large customers of Insight, Royal Caribbean, Marriott, folks that have had just the world turned upside down. On the other side, food delivery folks, et cetera. So we have a pretty good feel for kind of what the market's doing. And so let me give you kind of the big picture as we think about it. Enterprise clients, ourselves included, when Insight looks at the market right now, in general, we take a very long-term view. So if I look at, let's say, a small company in the portfolio that has 10 people in it, you've got to react real time. You can go out, you can grab folks, and you can say, well, golly gee whiz, okay, we're going to move from left to right, and we're going to move all of a sudden, we're going to pivot over here. In large organizations, especially global organizations, like an Insight that has physical operations in 24 countries all over the globe, you can't do that. So mentally, you think very hard about how you communicate, what you roll out, the long-term implications of pretty much every aspect. And then when you start talking about, let's call it remote work, in many ways, let's use Insight. Insight's existing operations are remote. How do we talk to France? How do we talk to Hong Kong? Well, right now we use video conference and we share screens. We happen to use Surface, Microsoft Surface on a regular basis. We use these kinds of tools, but Surface Hub. But that said, the reality is this idea of going fully remote is something that only part of the organization has done. So I was in the company headquarters last week, and as I'm in there, there's maybe 5 or 6 people. In my history, I've never seen that before. So while we may have a contingency plan, which we did for a virtual, we thought it would be a disaster recovery, hurricane, tornado, something crazy would happen to each of our facilities. How would we operate without it? Well, this is obviously a different type of disaster. But that said, it's one thing to have a contingency plan. It's another thing to actually operate and execute. What I see happening so much of the time with Insight is we're used to getting in a room and hashing it out. Okay, let's all get together. And when you're physically in a room, especially on a big strategic topic, what we would do is you talk and then you get to look at the other folks. You get the physical reaction. You get over half your communication coming from the body language. Is somebody leaning in? Are they attentively looking? Are they not? Well, now suddenly you don't really know that. You don't get that feel anymore. So what I would call on the big strategic, the brainstorming issues become much more challenging, especially for folks that haven't done that before. Let me switch it back for a second to what I would call the big picture on security access control. So one of the things with it is Insight, we are scared to death of getting a hack, let's say like a Home Depot. So today we deal with 95% of the Fortune 1000 globally in some form, either whether we're supplier number 1 or supplier number 71. If we were to get breached, if we were to have a problem with that, communications protocols, et cetera, I believe that our business would probably go to zero with that particular client. Nothing Insight sells can't be sold by someone else. It's really the execution, the reliability, the relationship, the security. That's why Insight gets the recurring revenue on a regular basis. If we were to lose that, all of a sudden that goes away. When you start talking about distributing your entire workforce, again, the security, access, and control is the very first thing that comes to your mind. Then you start talking about the reliability, okay? The last mile, so to speak, at, let's say, someone in Barcelona, well, how's their internet connection? How are they connecting in? So it's out of the control of, let's say, an Insight. If you've got 15,000 folks of employees and contractors around the globe, you're telling me some percentage of those aren't having an outage right now? As an example, Insight has a backup generator. We have entire battery systems. If the grid went down, we actually have satellite uplink on internet. Well, does John Doe have that in Barcelona? I don't think so. So you start thinking about that in terms of reliability, and then you start thinking about what's your backup to your backup. If John Doe can't be there, who else is going to be there? All of a sudden now we put a layer of costs on our business that wasn't there. Now, let's do the positive side. This has been trial by fire across our organization, our suppliers, and our customers to operate in truly a virtual format. Now, this works wonderfully for people that are experienced, know their job, have figured it out, and have done this before. Let me tell you what it doesn't work for, that people who have never really done this before. They're getting used to the whole process and having their kids or wife or spouse or husband jump into the call in the middle of it or whatever. And then the other piece to this is when you kind of think about this overall, what is the productivity going to be the same as it was? Well, in sales, as an example, it's easy to measure that. But in so many positions, like at Insight, we didn't put a metric on every single position. So we have no benchmark. We can't go back and say, well, what was it this time last year or this time last quarter? We don't know. So in some of the positions that are usually held to metrics, we can tell, hey, how's productivity? But in the absence of that, we're a little bit blind, trying to guess, trying to figure out, hey, is this person really being productive or are they not being productive? And how can we even check? Then there's the ethical and the moral obligation of, should we be listening in? Should we be putting these IT tools on top of our platforms to say, gosh, is this really working? Let me jump back to another piece. At Insight, we were very focused on our vision, our values, and then also what I would call our culture, which is a combination of 15 different things. I've spent most of my life studying corporate cultures, how to methodically build it, how to measure it. And even though a lot of times it seems haphazard, there's actually a massive structure in terms of how we do this. And if we get time later on, I'll show you how I map a culture out by in essence, the vision, the strategy, and then how do we make sure that the feedback mechanisms, the celebrations, every single piece and part basically rolls back up into that on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. Well, I've never done this 100% virtually. And Insight wasn't created. Our core values are hunger, heart, and harmony. Well, how do you have hunger, heart, and harmony where you're 100% virtual? You never actually physically see someone. Now, everything I've talked about so far is around internal. let's spin it for a second. Let's start talking about our customers. If Insight's got 100,000 active customers, let's say in the US, how do we interface with them? How do we, as an example, Insight has 7,000 customer-facing technical people in the US. How are they physically going to go out and meet the clients? Forget about doing the work on site, which can't be done right now. So basically, a huge portion of Insight's business is just not doable physically. But the other one is, how do you build a relationship with your existing clients? Now, how about your new clients? How are we going to build a relationship with somebody? Are you going to cold Zoom call them and say, hey, John, have you thought about buying IT products from Insight? It'll be great, right? Well, that's something we've never experienced. So all of a sudden, all of our existing motions from the top of the funnel, awareness, multi-threaded, all these pieces, the golden record, all this stuff, it's out the window. It doesn't work anymore. When you sell to enterprises specifically, hey, they want to see the whites of your eyes. A lot of it's not about price, availability, customer service. It's about trust. It's about reliability. It's about relationship. Hey, does this individual really know what you're doing? And you're not going to get them on a video call anytime soon. It's kind of like, when's the last time you answered the phone, work or personal, when you didn't know the number? Never, right? So how do we go get new business? How do we expand in a company like Exxon in this environment? Exxon has 100 different buying entities. I happen to know that because it's one of Insight's accounts. Well, how do we suddenly go get that next entity? How do we break in? How do we build that relationship when all the motions, all the experiences we have are face-to-face? Or get you on the phone, have a conversation, and we're going to come in and visit you. Well, gosh, that's out the window again. We're going to bring technical people in to brainstorm, talk about new digital innovations or whatever. So this, to me, is a great holding pattern for a business like Insight. But I got to believe other businesses, depending upon what their business is, this is a hell of a challenge just to function. Again, let alone to go get new customers. Suppliers, I think, are easier because of the fact that hopefully it's a mutual relationship. And they're actively seeking to do business with you. And that's incremental to them. Where customers, again, in a commoditized area, there's nothing Insight's offered that can't be offered by somebody else. Nothing. I'm going to take a breath and just listen a little bit. John, what are you thinking about, or did anything resonate that I was focused on?
Yeah, so one of the things that you were saying, because I thought about this quite a bit, actually. So my background's different, right? Small company, a lot of years running it virtually. And early on, like probably in, the 2005, 2010 range, there were a lot of applications available to monitor people's activity to ensure that they were actually doing work and not doing something other than work, right? And I think you were alluding to that a bit, especially in a job where we're not used to having a metric for it. So generally, other than sales and maybe IT, what do we do? And so one of the things that we've done is we've used project management systems for everything. So every position, and that came out of IT initially, right? Because they like project management systems. They need that. And they're equipped and enabled to go out there and do some things virtually because they've had that discipline. And now I think we're going to see regular business units within the organization having to adopt those types of methodologies and systems to be productive. And once you do that, I don't think you have to monitor what people are doing because their task load becomes the metric. You can see the tasks that they're supposed to get done.
If it's a task, great. But let's say it's a customer success person, and they're doing a lot of long-term things. Or they're really tasks you can measure, not measure. We've already seen there's a huge amount of people we think are doing great things, and they may be online 22 hours or 24 a day, but how do we measure that? It's just something that we've never considered and never really analyzed. Yeah. And if you think about a layered organization, so I always look at it like this. When you get that, not the third layer, the fourth layer, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, you have a lot of middle management, which are basically communicators. And they synthesize information, they either collapse it, they condense it, and they summarize it and bring it out. They prioritize it, et cetera. Yep. Now, as an example, that becomes more difficult.